Very glad to see you out there. I'm George Moss again here at the studio, the number one studio in, let's see what we're going to say here, the number one studio in the place where we're now setting up the studio. I'm glad you're here. We're going to be talking about some things here, and I want to clear a couple of things up that are passing for the greatest uh, constitutional understandings that's out there. And I'm going to come behind some of this and try to clean a little bit of it up. It definitely it definitely needs it. You'd be surprised at how much nonsense is being talked about in this country. Let me say this though before I get started. I want to, I'm sometimes very critical of Mark Levine and some of these others. Who is that? The other person that Sean Hannity. They're both commentators on Fox. And if I'm not on Fox, I'm on Newsmax. Mostly Newsmax is my number one station today, and then I kind of go back and forth. I got some programs I pick out on both stations, and I try to watch. But every once in a while, they have another program that I got to watch because the fluke is that they do something that is unusual, and they have a guest on there that I have to watch. As happened yesterday on Meet the Press, and they had this. You got to think of a name. The one that is the hostess of that program, and they did a program yesterday. They had as a guest for about 45 minutes of the hour program. The last 15 minutes, they had to come behind him and make sure they had a panel to criticize everything that he said. But anyway, the program that was on. Was that on ABC or NBC? I don't watch too much of these other stations. I have to think about which one of the stations is on. They're all bad, and so it's very rare that I even watch them. And I certainly don't watch them for any of the programming they're doing in terms of the news. But they have if you're going to have Donald Trump on there, I tell you right now, I got to tune that in. And I tuned it in yesterday in terms of Meet the Press, and it should be renamed now to Meet the partisan political pundits, because that's what it is. It's you're meeting. You're not meeting the press. I guess you are meeting the press in the sense that you're meeting those person that claim to be part of the press. These people are propagandists. I guess that would be the name of it, really. Meet the propaganda. What's the word? Propaganda mongers.
Rush Limbaugh used to call it a meeting to the depressed.
You cannot top. Don't we miss Rush Limbaugh? You can't top. That's a program that really needs to go. They need to play some of the old tapes of Rush Limbaugh. He's gone from among us now, but his voice, much of what he talked about, still resonates today because he was a one of a kind. And I can remember the sadness when it was announced that he had cancer, and people were just so foreboding about the fact that his time was limited, and we all knew that we were going to eventually lose Rouge. We would lose this Mount Rushmore. Rush Limbaugh was a Mount Rushmore type figure, a one of a kind, and his voice is very much needed right now. But we're going to try to pick up some of the slack, and we're going to continue to go forward, and then hopefully somebody will come along in the aftermath of those that are still here and continue to pick this up until we get this problem resolved. It is resolvable.
I know. I nominate George Moss.
Yeah. Well, we're going to see what happens here. I'm going to do some correcting of a few things that these that's outside of the purview of these so-called constitutional scholars, and they're not going to say they're not going to say anything after I finish with what I have to say today, because I'm going to be talking about Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2. Before I get to that, I did want to say something about the program last night that Sean Hannity did, not that Mark Levine did. I get it mixed up because watch both. But this was Mark Levine. You know, Mark Levine comes on Saturday and Sunday, and sometimes he'll be a guest on Sean Handy's program. Sometimes on Thursday, we can't take too much more of Sean hogging the microphone, so he might bring um, Mark Levine on there, and then he gives Mark Levine a free reign, and Mark Levine can just go and he doesn't interrupt Mark Levine. So whatever he brings Mark Levine on the program to do, Mark Levine talks for the entirety of the pro. It's not an interview; it's really just him making some points, and you can always count on having something that you can learn from it. Most of the time, you can. When you turn to the program I was on yesterday, Meet the Press, I don't turn on that program. In fact, I think that might have been the first time I watched that program this year. But I had heard that they were going to have Donald Trump on there, and that right there made me go and find. First, I had to find what network is it on, and what is the number on my. I have a what's that gadget on top of your house? Satellite, and so I have Direct TV. So I made sure I had it already figured to tape it at a certain time when it came on, so I wouldn't miss it. And that person that does that, Meet the Press, you ought to see this program sometimes. You talking about somebody that's anti-Trump. I'm trying to think of her name. I suffered through that for an hour, and I'm not trying to watch that program too much. Yeah, you better have Donald Trump. If you want me to watch that program, you better have Donald Trump on there on a weekly basis. Otherwise, I got to tune that out. That woman is so hateful, and I'm trying to think of her name. She's easy to forget. Okay, I'll think of it. It'll come up hopefully before the program is over. But I wanted to say a couple of things before I get started with what I want to say here today, because I want to say a couple of things that all these scholars, the constitutional scholars, are in fact missing, and they claim they're constitutional scholars. I'm going to show them that they're not. They're not that. These are lawyers. They are. How am I going to classify them? These are constitutional lawyers. That's a different category than a constitutional scholar. And you could hear the lawyer aspect when I listen to Dershowitz and Turley. I can hear the legalese that's involved in their comments, because that's where they are. These are legal scholars. That's what I couldn't get at first when I started listening. When I was listening to them, I couldn't understand, because they would say constitutional scholar. I couldn't understand how what they were talking about could be classified as a constitutional scholar until I came across this right here in this book, written by a person that is a JD and a PhD, and that's Kevin Guzman, who is the author of the Politically Incorrect Guide to the Constitution. And what he says at the top of this book on the cover, it's time to put the Constitution back in, quote, constitutional law. To put the Constitution, he says, back in constitutional law. And then he says further down, modern, and then he puts constitutional law in quotation marks, modern constitutional law has almost nothing to do with the Constitution. Now, that would throw you for a loop, because the assumption people make when they say that they are constitutional scholars, that they're talking about scholars of the Constitution. They're not talking about that. And I kept listening to them on TV before I began to call them what they are, television scholars. That's what I call them today. and they're not going to say anything because that's what they are. I'm going to prove this today, and what I'm going to be talking about in Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2, because none of the persons in this country are talking about this. And there's not one scholar in this country, I'll tell you that right now. There's not one scholar in this country that's going to say what I'm saying today on this program. So but I have to understand the difference in terms of being a constitutional lawyer. That's what that's how I would classify them. They're constitutional lawyers. And what Guzman is making reference to here is something different. His reference is to those who have careened off of the Constitution into the legalese that is in fact said to be about the Constitution. And that's why he says further down on the front cover of his book, modern constitutional law has almost nothing to do with the Constitution. What they're claiming is constitutional law is really the opinions of the Supreme Court. And I raised a question, I think 2 weeks ago, when I was saying here on the air that what's the difference between their opinion and anybody else's opinion? And the difference is that their opinion is backed up by Mr. Winchester. And Mr. Winchester is backed up by the power of the state, which is the only force in this country that can initiate force legally. And you see that in terms of this person by the name of Penny. That was on trial in New York because in the subway, you saw this, where he was restraining this one guy that was going off and was a berserk person talking about killing everybody. And this guy is intervened and then restrained the person. And all these people are out here on the street. Not all of them should be out here on the street. Some of them should be in some of these asylums getting treatment. And he was restraining the person, and then sometimes these persons are being restrained and they end up doing some things that cause the restraints to be such that in wiggling and fighting against the restraint, they cause more pressure to be applied upon restraining that's going on. And because they already have something in their system, it aggravates the circumstance they're already in, and they end up, as this guy did on that subway, end up dying. And then this guy's now got to go to trial, and the trial is discouraging us from intervening on anybody's behalf that may need help, because we don't know if our intervention is going to make us end up in a court of law by these twisted judges, these inept judges on the court who are making these ridiculous rulings. And now this man's on trial when the person's really a hero. And how much of that is going on? That's going on all over the place. That's pretty much what goes on in the courts today, because these judges are mentally deranged. We have people on the courts on these courts that are mentally deranged. Many of them are psychopaths, as could be seen by what happened in Merchants Court. And this woman's name came up and then went back down in the recesses of my mind. I had her name there, and the one that does Meet the Press. She was just so her interview with Donald Trump. This woman was almost pathologically concerned about whether or not Donald Trump was going to use government power to go after his political enemies. she kept that that was raised 12 times as I counted it in that interview. The interview lasted 45 minutes. The last 15 minutes, because they have that commercial in there too. So the last segment, I can't say the last 15 minutes, the last segment of Meet the Press, they had a panel come out after she had basically interrogated Trump. She didn't interview him, she interrogated him. And the man couldn't finish the sentence before she had another question she had to ask. But the concern, her overriding concern, was whether or not Donald Trump was going to direct a person that they're all fearful of. This person that they have already, that Donald Trump is nominating to head the FBI. They're terrified of this.
But doesn't anybody coming in with a new administration pretty much required, because of all the machinations that happen, has to make an inquiry and investigation, because that can only upset the next the next administration if you don't address this kind of stuff. I mean, you'd be negligent in not doing that. It's not vindictiveness; it's like a requirement.
John, you're making such a great point. That's the point I'm trying to get across in my writing. That they want to, this lady yesterday on that program, Meet the Press, was trying to turn this into a matter of retribution. You're not, it's not, it's, let me say it this way. It's not about retribution. Here's what they don't get. The law is about retribution. It's not that you are, and it should not be. The problem is that the law is being partisanly applied, but it's retribution. You're not going to be able to do the things that Biden did over the course of 4 years and then just walk away. We're not even talking about retribution. We're talking about accountability. And you're not going to be able to have a country if you don't go after these people who, if you notice it, the pardons are going to have to be comprehensive. Why? Because everybody was violating the law during the administration of Joe Biden. This is the worst administration in American history. This man was the most lawless president we've ever had.
Jimmy Carter was inept, and it was a horrible situation. You probably remember it more than I did. You're more cognizant of what should have been done. But Jimmy Carter, his administration has been surpassed by the total delinquency and total negligence of this administration.
It was, John, at least with Carter, this was like benign suffering. This was a combination with Biden of benign and malignant. This man was a cancer on this country. This was a swamp that we had for the last 4 years. And they were deliberately using lawfare to go after their political enemies. And now this woman on that program wanted to know if Donald Trump was going to let this person that he just appointed as the FBI director, and I'll talk about that too before this program is over, because they're doing something else with that as well. And you have to read my post today, because I have to tell you that there were some areas I went into today that I hadn't gone into before. And none of these scholars are going to go into this area because they don't understand Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2. That I know, because I've listened to them and they don't understand it. And I want to show you why they don't understand it, why that is not understood by what the language requires and what they're doing. Nobody's going to say this, because I know you don't believe this. This is just Eastern, but this is not Harvard, and that's good. They talk about somebody's a Harvard emeritus scholar. Okay, so you weren't fired. That's all that means. That you kept your job and you didn't get fired from your job. So you retired emeritus from the School of Law at Harvard University. Whoopie-doo. But the point is that sometimes it would have been better to work outside of the system without the merit that you get, because you have to teach what the facts are. And sometimes being emeritus professor, meaning that you retired from the university, in good stead is because you didn't challenge what the university was in fact doing, but you went along with everything it was doing. And so that emeritus part, you know what it means, you're a scholar that retired with merit. Well, what's the merit about? Can I ask that question? If everybody in your department is wrong in what they're saying, and then you went along with what they're saying, and you didn't raise any ruffle any feathers because of what you were saying is a counter to it, because y'all were in lockstep agreement. Yeah, you retire emeritus professor, but what does that really mean? That you retired with merit? But sometimes there's something wrong with the merit, because how do you get merit? It's just like, how do you get tenure? You're thinking about get tenure at, I've been at those universities. You're thinking about gets merit at those universities by being in those universities, challenging the orthodox in those universities. So they started introducing these scholars and talk about he's a Harvard emeritus professor. Okay, fine. But what does that mean? It means that they retired from this, quote, prestigious university in good standing with the university. That's what that means. But what it means today to me is that, based upon their scholarship, what it means to me is not that Harvard has this, but hopefully they'll get it in the near future. They certainly need it. And that is to say they need a good football team. That's what it means to me, because I hate to say this, there are no good colleges in this country.
Hillsdale.
That's the exception. Hillsdale, John, that would be the exception. Hillsdale is the exception because, look, they don't take any government money, so they don't have to sing the tune. When the fiddle is being played, they're the ones playing the fiddle. They don't have to have the government playing the fiddle while Rome is burning. They can play their own fiddle and save the scholarship at their university. This is the only one I think in the country like that. Because most of them, take the money, and if you take the money, you got to walk the plank. You can't be out there taking the money and then be a loose cannon. Otherwise, the money dries up. The money is a quiet down type of thing. It's a prepayment on the university teaching what the ruling class of this country wants taught. And the only reason, as I examine it now, and I'm going back over what I thought about it when I was one of those starry-eyed persons in the undergraduate level, I thought that I didn't understand that these universities like Harvard and Yale and Cornell, Brown, these other, maybe Stanford, and some of these others, I didn't understand that their so-called academic prowess was based upon the fact that the government makes it that by choosing graduates from those universities in order to people the government. And so therefore, because that is where they reach into, it gives them a greater credence in the private sector or the public sector, because the universities are more or less public institutions because they are actually publicly supported. So I didn't understand the powers of the university is not really based upon academic merit. Harvard is not any more of a scholarly institution today than these other universities. Nor is Columbia, nor is well, all of them, nor any of the rest of them, I should say. But the name, the residue of the name, continues from the idea that there once marquee university. I'm beginning to challenge that as well. I am really beginning to think about, when was that ever true? And I go back to 1895 when W.E.B. Du Bois, that came out of Fisk University from I think he was from Massachusetts, I believe, and he went to they had a thing in is I think it was Massachusetts. We had a thing that all the top 10 graduates of this one school, all their graduates would go to Harvard, the top 10. And Du Bois thought he would be, since he was a top 10 scholar, he would be going to Howard University. Ended up at Fisk University. And at Fisk University, he had this light skin, dark skin thing going on. And Du Bois was a light skin. And so he ended up at Fisk. He was surprised to be at Fisk. He thought he'd be going to Harvard. He did go to Harvard later on. But his initial education, the one where he actually, quote unquote, found himself, was at Fisk University. In Fisk, I can attest to this because I played baseball and I went around to these different schools in the South. And at one school, Allen University, they had all the dark skins there. And then at Fisk, if you were dark skinned, you weren't you see you had to send a picture at Fisk University. And if you didn't pass the vanilla folder test, you weren't getting in. You weren't getting in there. I you hear that you're not getting into Fisk University. Not at that point. I don't know what the policy is now, but I can tell you this: they had a light skin, dark skin policy. If you were dark, you went to Allen. You went to Allen University. And if your picture showed that you were darker than that vanilla folder, you were not getting in there because these were the boule, as they claim, and all of that. There's a lot of stuff that went on that I wasn't understanding at the time that I was going through it. But I saw with my own eyes. I had to analyze it later on. I have analyzed it later on. Let me analyze one other thing while I'm on this point. One of my students, one of my former students, good student too, and I want to commend her for her excellence when she was in my class. But she wrote me online the other day, and she wanted to know, why am I so different than all these others out here, like everybody else? And Mr. Mars, you taught me to be proud and blah blah blah, and yeah, I didn't tell you to be proud of Al Sharpton. I didn't tell you to be proud of Barack Obama. I didn't say that. But see, I'm so different in terms of wearing this hat. I'm so different from so many others. Let me tell you something. When I was soaring among the eagles back in the day, you couldn't tell that I was an eagle because I was among so many other eagles and so on and so forth. But when I started soaring with these seagulls, and we were flocking differently at different heights. I mean, Jonathan, has anybody read the book Jonathan Livingston? John, have you read that book, Jonathan Livingston Seagull? You know about that book?
I've only heard about it. I've seen it everywhere.
Yeah.
And like used bookshops, Goodwills and
get
stuff.
it. Yeah, get it when you get a chance.
Really? Because I mean, now you don't see it as often, but
yeah, but he got fired because of that. It's not what you call a scholarly book. It's just like what's that guy's name that wrote Love Story? I forget his name, but he was at Harvard University. That's not a scholarly book, but it makes a good point. But even though it's well written, they fired him for that. You can't write that kind of book at this university level. You have to write it on the level where nobody see. It's another thing too. I need to say this. If you write a book and people are reading your book and can read it, that's not considered scholarly because your book got to be written so only the scholars read it. When they write these books, they're not writing for you; they're writing for the other scholars. And if you're writing a book on where it's comprehensive to the masses, how are they going to claim that they're above you if they're writing and you can understand what they're writing about? It's almost like it's a demand. It's almost like it's a demand. They write books that nobody reads. So that's what has happened over a period of time. I was out there with some of the with the Eagles, soaring with the Eagles, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, some of the people that would be Stokely Carmichael, some of those persons today on both sides of the racial ladder that would be considered radical and that. And when you're out there with in the midst of that, those kinds of persons, what's that one? The person that kind of invented conservatism in the United States, the one that uses tongue kind of erratically, and I can't think of his name right now, but he was really like the modern, the person that brought conservatism to the forum here in the United States. Modern did that. What is that guy's name? He was on PBS, and a lot of persons go in there debating him, but he was pretty sharp, and you didn't want to debate him too much. Names are, you kind of get older, but names don't always come to you as readily as they once did. But I will tell you that when you're out there soaring with so many people that are soaring, it's hard to distinguish the voices, and because of the commonality of the understandings that are being taught, maybe from different vantage points, but basically you kind of come to the same conclusions. People can see the level in which you are, in fact, discourse, and they take the fact that there are so many persons who are talking in that parade the same way. They take that as a validation of your scholarship. But what happens when the other voices fade away and your voice remains constant, and there's so many persons talking in the opposite channel, and your voice is singular now being expressed? It sounds like, what is this, Ms. Moss? What are you doing now? I get a lot of that, and I have to, and I have respect for some of the students that stood out when they were in my class. Not all of them came out analytically, but many of them did, and but none of them on this level here. This is a level. This is not a level that everybody gets to, and that includes these scholars in this country. So I had a student who wrote me and wanted to know, Mr. Moss, you made me so proud and blah, blah, blah. Well, you're not proud now? So if you're going to see, here's the point. 2 points. All that glitters is not gold. And everybody who is your color is not necessarily your kind. If you're going by a skin color analysis of events, you're going to make a very terrible mistake, particularly today when you have so many persons out here who are out here selling. And you don't see the selling. All you hear are the words coming out of their mouth, but they're selling. And I don't have anything to sell. And so a lot of things get confused in the mix. But I've been very consistent, and I'm very consistent now. What I want and what I've always wanted is the truth, that nothing else matters. And I didn't care when I was in the public school system. I didn't care anything about who liked it or didn't like it. I ran into I had problems with every administration that I was under, all the way up to and including the superintendent of the schools. Because there's no compromise with the truth. Unless you can show me a truth that's higher than the truth that I have obtained through my study and so on and so forth, and that's very hard to do. That's very hard to do. I'm just going to tell you, that's hard. That's hard work. And they didn't understand that. And that's why I was in that office all the time being called in. Because I wasn't willing to compromise. Because I could not find anybody to show me where what I was saying was wrong. All they were saying to me is they disagreed with it. So what? I disagreed with them. So that's even Steven. What about the facts? Can we get to that point? What do the facts say? Unless you can show me where your facts top the facts that I have, why should I change my facts to accommodate you because your title is higher? I haven't had anybody answer that question. Why should your title entitle you to have the last word in anything? I don't understand that. We have the same degrees, and yet their degrees they can't. They came out of a university higher than East Michigan University because of, why is it a higher university? Why is that university higher? I had to figure out why would they have more credence there than they have anywhere else? Well, I did figure it out. They have the government giving more credence to that university than others because they're picking they know what's being taught there and they pick them out of there.
You know what I'm finding it harder because I'm a more of a constitutional conservative, a person who believes a person should has a right to make their own choices, failures or success on their own. And I find it harder and harder to defend my college background because I spent most of my adult life in educational institutions of the secondary education, higher education, and I spent most of my life over 20 some years in
Yep.
different working there, different capacities, being a student as well. And basically, I look back, and if I had to do it all over again, I think I would have just opted for a few business classes, or maybe become like a chiropractor or something like that. Because the academia, it's wonderful though. In some ways, I love it, but there's also a way I can understand. Now, maybe we should do a separate thing on that someday because
Yeah.
about academia, because you and I both have that background
Yeah,
in
we do.
academia, and but it's like it's like you're wondering. Well, I'm gonna put it this way: I'm coming out like, why did what? I listened to the same stuff, but I wasn't persuaded by it. And I'm still seeing very little fruit or little existence of why what they're advocating going to work out or actually should be even implemented, especially in the current era. And I'm saying academia is basically becoming largely irrelevant. I can see people sending kids to trade school. We need people in HVAC, we need people in medical things, we need people like that.
Mhm.
This academia. Now you question you can't say who's definitively who male or female is when that's been one of the baseline established ideas that we've been operating our systems on for generations. I think it's an absurdity. Basically it's just becoming too decadent.
Yeah, John, I don't have anything to add to anything you said there because they're not even teaching them today. I'm talking about at the university level. They're not even teaching them to write. They're up here talking about uh, gendering and um, mansplaining. What is this? What kind of language is this? Mansplaining and male this and male that. They're teaching this stuff at Harvard University, and that's still considered to be a top-notch university, even though they're teaching stuff that's strange to the academic community. You're talking that they had one professor over there they highlighted at Harvard, and she went up against one of these. This was a person that really got some sense in the Senate. The guy from Missouri. The senator there, Holland, Senator Hollis. He this is a pretty smart man. He's one of the few you can listen to and learn something from. There's some, you can run for president AOC, but nobody. Look here, you're not going to get it because you got to get out there like.
I like Holly better than I do John Kennedy, from Louisiana.
Yeah,
I think he's far more. He actually is more intellectual than he doesn't
he is.
across as witticisms
right.
or folksy as like
right.
John Kennedy does, where it's real thin.
Right.
Yeah.
Kennedy gets away with a lot of things because he is folksy and he makes some points, but he's not a scholar. He's Holly from Missouri. He's very scholarly. And he interviewed this lady at Harvard University. Well, she came before the committee, and she was so close off, and she accused him of this mansplaining because he didn't agree with what she was talking about. See, now mansplaining. He's a man talking to a woman. So anytime you don't agree with him, you're talking down, you're talking down to him because you don't agree with what they're saying. And he was saying to her that I would one. I like to know: are you tolerant in your class? Do you allow your students to have a different view than what you have? And All she was saying was that no, I mean, you could tell by what she was talking about. No, you can't say have a different point of view. Those college classes don't allow you to have a different point of view. They punish you in your grade. This lockstep, you know, German boots back in the day of the 30s, German boots in that classroom, and shut up. What's going on in those classrooms? That if Trump wins, you got to have a cry session. If you're not in that classroom crying, and you need to have the teacher serve you some hot chocolate and some cookies.
Well, I don't know if you're ever familiar with the group called the Indigo Girls. They're two lesbians, made admitted, but they have a song called "Closer to Fine," and they said about being in the church, being in a cult, the college for, I saw a paper, take my paper to a college professor. He never did marry, never saw a B grade movie. Said he could judge my performance. He said he could see right through me. I lay prostrate to the higher mind for 4. Got my paper. Now I'm free. About the educational problem. This is like made in the like late 80s, early 90s. A song. And this is a liberal saying this about that academic situation, and they do. Both women have a real marked degree of education, impressive degree actually. But yeah, I mean that's what it is. I mean the college, it's not. I mean another thing is they co-opted it from religious institutions. Almost all the major ones in this country, we're talking about Harvard and Princeton and Yale, were originally established by religious denominations for the education of clerical people who do their ministry. So I mean, and they've gone so far off any kind of center where you can actually, there's no certainty where they teach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's become a religion in terms of, I mean, it's like a third rail. We have a belief system more than we have an academic system today in this country. It's like you have to have a certain worship of the church or scholarship or the lack therein. And it's like a belief in this view and a disbelief in the other view. And if you're not down with that, some of them are in those colleges right now having to listen to the indoctrination and understand where that channel is playing from and then write in that channel. If you write in a different channel, that's going to be a markdown in the grade according to whether or not you agree with the orthodoxy as they would describe it.
I personally, I mean, and I'm an argumentative person, but when I was writing a paper, I generally regurgitated what the professors, especially the philosophy courses and stuff, because let's face it, they expected that. And if you did go anything outside of it, even they said, well, you have to make your own defense, they would not allow it. I mean, it was a very, very, there was a canon dogma. They're very dogmatic, and that's what it is. And that's what's even getting worse now.
Yeah, it's terrible.
The university is supposed to be about free inquiry. I learned more in the smoking section of the second floor of the U Center, the smoking lounge. And I didn't smoke. All my friends did. Heated debates and arguments, and that's where you have to do. You have a position, you have to argue it. That's better than anything you're going to learn sitting in a lecture hall.
Yeah, John, you're making some points here, and people got to pay attention to what has happened in this country and what is happening in this country. If you have everybody on the campus in a certain department thinking the same way, nobody's doing very much thinking. It should be encouraged to have the dissenting view, because then you have a dialogue to which person can see more than one side of an issue and then can make a determination of where there's a television station. This is Newsmax, and they got a commercial there where they talk about they don't tell me what to think, and they have about 4 or 5 come on there, and they don't tell me what to think, and they keep saying that. And the point they're stressing is that Newsmax gives you a little bit more information, and you can make up your own mind. And they're showing the contrast between them and other networks, and they're in competition, lockstep competition with Fox, because they're challenging the hegemony of Fox, and they're going to if Fox is not very careful. They got a few shows over there that still maintaining a certain presence, but if they don't watch it, they're going to be overtaken by Newsmax, because Newsmax is pretty much, they're conservative, but they are not trying to guide you toward the mindset that Fox does. You hear them, you can hear them in terms of Sean Hannity's program, where Sean Hannity basically asks his guests after he motes on what he feels, and then ask him if his guests agree, because that's what they'll do. I mean, sometimes I agree, sometimes I don't agree, but can I have my own opinion? And that's allowed them the kind of question. They don't do the question. Maybe that's why Tucker Carlson was unpalatable at a certain point on that network because Tucker Carlson would do an interview with guests, and he was not doing this guiding. This man knows how to do an interview to bring out the information that this guest has to offer. Because there's a lot of people out here thinking now. They're not just thinking in one channel. A lot of people out here thinking, and he brings guests on to then interrogate them and get their understandings. Sometimes a lot of times, what the reason why he's overtaken Rogan, and Rogan is that Rogan is really what won. I think Rogan was a very important part. I can't say is the reason why Donald Trump won the election because of Rogan, but that interview didn't hurt Donald Trump. Those 20-some-odd million people that watched Joe Rogan's interview of Donald Trump, that didn't hurt him. I can tell you that right now. That did not hurt Donald Trump. And he did a masterful job. They both did a masterful job in that interview. And you were watching something great going on there because the ebb and flow was so great. And I don't think Rogan was sold on Donald Trump before that interview, but after that interview was over, he was sold on Donald Trump.
That's remarkable about Trump, though. I mean, Megyn Kelly, you had things years ago against each other. They had an animosity towards one another, and somehow now she actually defends Donald Trump. I mean, and he's able to. And J.D. Vance, his vice president, same thing. He was a Trumper. Now he's on. How does he do that? He reconciles people that would like. I mean, they threw the flag in to say flag on this play of what you're doing. Now he's got them on board. How does he do that?
Yeah, that's right, John. That's another point. John, that Donald Trump, the one thing about him is that he can go into hostile territory. He's not trying to convert anybody. You invite him on your program. He's there to defend what it is he represents, and he goes in the forum and he does that. He did it yesterday on Meet the Press, and I cannot think of her name, but I'll tell you that she could not shake him from what he was about. She kept asking him, I think I counted 12 times. She asked him, she was asking him pretty much, are you going to sick the FBI on your political enemy? He has political enemies now. Look at what they were trying to do to him, put him in jail. And so I never heard her raise a question about them going after Donald Trump, trying to put him in jail, trying to put his children in jail. Like this weasel over in California that just took the seat that was vacated by the death of Dianne Feinstein. Adam Schiff. That man, boy, don't get me started on this man. This man has I can't tell people who should have your representative, but this man has no business being in a governing body of this country, as bad as he is. This man is terrible. And he was willing to come out and lie, and would have been willing to put Trump's children in jail because of running with a narrative that this man had done this and there was Russian collusion, the children were involved in it, and all the rest of it, knowing he was lying. You cannot believe how vicious these people are. You can't believe when Donald Trump says that, and it's hard people to comprehend this when Donald Trump makes the point of saying that they're not after me, they're after you. I'm just in the way. They are after you, and the reason why it's hard to deal with is because you've not done anything to them. You don't know how much these people resent you in this country. And that's the point that Tucker Carlson is making, by the way. When Tucker Carlson said the other day on one of his programs, one of his podcast programs, because he got to do podcasts now, no network is going to be able to handle him. He's too independent for that. So he does his own podcast. He's going to eventually take over the number one spot in podcast program. Rogan is number one right now, but Carlson is inching up there to that spot. And he said recently, John, you said we're running out of time. He said recently that he didn't know why people pay taxes in this country. I mean, without objection. He's not saying don't pay your taxes. He's saying you have no representation. These people are not representing you. They resent you. And Donald Trump has picked up on upon that resentment. That's what he's talking about. He says they're not after me, they're after you. I'm just in their way, and they are after you. But you can't figure that out because you're not done anything to them to be after you. You're not all in MEGA. You're not all in MEGA. But if you were in MEGA, why would they be against MEGA if you understand the initial stand for MAGA stands for Make America Great Again? Why would they be objecting to that, you think? Why would they be objecting to the MAGA movement? Why aren't they part of the MAGA movement? Why did Donald Trump have to fight for 4 years to get an audience with the ruling members? Because he had an audience with the American people. You saw that through the fact that he had 306 electoral votes in 2016. And in 2024, 8 years later, you couldn't say anything about his victory this time because what Donald Trump did, and I didn't understand what he was doing at one time. Why is he going to California? There's no chance of winning in California. Why is he going to New York? There's no chance in New York, Massachusetts. Get out of here. But I can now see what he was doing. He was taking away the argument that, yeah, he wins the electoral vote. You can pick out the states and get the number of electoral votes up by the number of states you carry. If they have enough electoral votes to get you over the hump, you need 270 because there are 530 electoral votes. Half of that is 269. You need 270, therefore, to win through the electoral college. But Donald Trump took away the other argument they had. You win the electoral college, but look how you didn't get the popular vote. They made that argument with Hillary Clinton. What he did this time, because this man is a thinker, he went using some of the resources and some of the some other minds around him, one of which is his daughter-in-law, Laura Trump, married to I think this is his youngest son, married to Eric Trump. This is a very smart lady. They need to get her. I don't know if she's gonna run for the seat vacated by this person that stood down. I don't think. See, I'm not for the standing. I'm not for the standing down. It's quitting the process because I want. That's why I wanted to come to the studio and talk about the process, because if they understood the process rather than what they're saying about it, they would not be standing down. They think if they see, look, here's what they got you thinking. They got you thinking, and this is what they're doing. They're going to 3 or 4 rhinos, such as Lisa Murkowski from Alaska and Susan Collins from Maine, total rhinos. And if this guy had not stepped down from Utah, that rhino there, Romney, they go these rhinos show that they're not going to be supportive, and they got a very thin majority. And so the people that are nominated think they don't have the support, so they quit the process. And what I'm saying to them is that you need to understand the process. That's why I came to the studio today to talk about the process. And I'm going to explain it to you by reading the language here to tell you what the language actually means. Because these so-called constitutional scholars in this country, they don't understand this language. And that's why they don't talk. And I never hear them talk about it. But I want to read something to you about the language and explain to you what this language is actually saying here. And that's what I really want to do today on this program. I want to read Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2. And if I can see it, I want you to listen to this very carefully, because the language in Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2 goes from different aspects of the separation of powers. And the reason why it's not understood is because it goes from the separation of powers in terms of the separation that is on the level of the powers being separated horizontally in the federal government. But there's another separation of powers that we don't talk about, and that's the separation of powers that is inherent in the federal system. And that's a vertical separation of powers. The states and the federal government, that's a separation of powers also. And I want you to understand this from that vantage point in terms of Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2. And I'm going to read it to you, and I'm going to show you how in that part of the Constitution, it jumps back and forth from the separation of powers at the federal level, and it does something else later on in that same section of the Constitution, where it goes to the vertical power, where it's now dealing with not the separation on the federal level, but is now dealing with something else in terms of, I'll make a point here, something that's on the different levels because of the federal system. And those are inherent powers. In other words, there are certain powers it's jumping to in the second part. I'm going to show you that that's in there. In the second part of it, of the language in Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2, is going to jump from the federal level into and talking about the separation because of the separation powers. That is a separation by the article, the Article 1, 2, and 3 separation of the powers by the different branches of the government: the federal, the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. That's one separation that you can see in the Constitution very clearly because Articles 1, 2, and 3 do that, and everybody teaches that. But what's happening in Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2 is that they are moving from in the first part, they are dealing with the separation of powers because of the departmental separation. But they then jump into another part of the separation of powers that is, in fact, not a separation of powers based upon the departmental separation, that is, say, from the legislative, the executive, and judicial, but a separation based upon the federal and the state, and that's a separation that is based upon the inherent powers. Now, here's what the scholars are not getting. You have to listen to this very, very, very closely, and I'm going to read it and I'm going to explain this to you. No scholar is going to explain this. No Harvard scholar is going to explain this. Listen very carefully. And let me see if I can see it here. Let's see if, yeah, maybe I can take these glasses. I bought these glasses thinking I'd be able to use these. These are kind, they have the focus on one side, and you're supposed to be able to tune that side in and tune this side, and you can see more clearly. They make me more blind. Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2 says this. He, and they're talking about the president, he shall have power by, listen very carefully, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate to make trying to make out this, to make with the, well, I should say the advice and the consent of the Senate to make treaties with the consent and advice of the Senate. Listen to this part here. Provided that 2/3 of the senators agree. Look at that carefully. Because you see what is happening here is that one part of the, listen carefully, one part of this is passive and one part of it is active. This is what they're not getting. The consent, listen carefully, the consent and the advice is passive. Why? Because the consent and advice is already given. And who gave it? The states. By delegating the powers to the federal government. But it also has an active part, because the active part is, in addition to that, you must have something else in order for it to meet the smell test. And that is provided that. You see the word provided that in that language? Provided that 2/3 of the senators concur. That's an active part. Now listen carefully here. Go to the part about the appointment and the nomination process, which is also in that same part of the Constitution, Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2. And then see if you can find, I wanted to put on the screen, but that didn't work out as well as I wanted it to, because I wanted it in large print so blind George Moss could read it. But I can make it out here. In fact, I don't need to read it, but I need to show you that it's here, because a lot of people don't believe this, because I'm the only one saying it. And so a lot of persons are saying that I don't want to think I'm making anything up here. But here's what this other part says. This is in terms of the nomination and the appointment process. This is part here. Now you saw where it says, provided that 2/3 of the senators will concur. Okay, now listen and see if you see that in this part here. And I have to skip over some parts to get to the point I'm trying to make here. I'm going to read over, he shall have power by and with the advice and consent of the Senate. That part is the same. But down here, it does not say provided that. It doesn't have provided that in this part. It says with the advice and consent of the Senate to appoint ambassadors, other public ministers, and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States. Did you notice it did not say here, provided that, in that part there? They said provided that in the first part of that. You see this part here is totally passive. It's not active, it's passive. And it's passive because the agreement and the consent has already occurred. Why is that power different from the first part where it says provided that, and then it says, in addition to provided that 2/3, you see, is passive and active. The consent and the advice is given by the fact that it exists. And why does it exist? Through the delegation of powers. The second part is totally passive. There's no active part to it. Because you see, by setting up the federal system, where there's a hierarchy in terms of the president and those who are to accent, the accent has already occurred. Because the accent is that which occurred at the Constitutional Convention in 1787, and that has occurred because it's inherently agreed to by them agreeing to the federal system. I have to tell you something here, and I'm going to pick this up in my discussion tomorrow in a part that I didn't deal with today. And this segment I wrote, I would encourage you to read that article on Facebook. And tomorrow, what I'm going to be doing is going into why that to do what they were doing prior to 1913 doesn't work anymore, because the circumstances change. But the reason why it says there in the advice and consent of the states is because at that point in time, when it was written in 1787, prior to what occurred in 1913, the senators were the representatives of the states, and the states had a stake in it because they were John. You have okay, because the states were a part of that process because they have to have a voice in it because the states are represented in the treaties being signed. They have a stake in that. If the federal government does that, the states are involved in it because the president making a decision and all the states are involved in it. So the states are therefore to be approved by the Senate. Why the Senate? Why not the House of Representatives? Because the senators were to be the representatives of the states. So the senators have to agree to it because the states have to be involved in that. But they changed that in 1913. So a lot of things changed as a result of that. And I want to talk about that tomorrow in my post. But here we need to know that what it changed now is that it doesn't have the same power in terms of the consent and the advice part of that document because it's been detached from the states. Isn't that true? You scholar, you agree with that? You're not saying anything about it. Do you agree with that? And I have to tell you that they don't agree, but they're not going to say anything about it because this is above their level. This is above their pay level. And they're not going to say anything about it because they don't understand this. They don't understand the passive voice in the Constitution and the active voice in the Constitution. That's something they never heard about in their grad classes that they took. Okay, so that's pretty much what I wanted to come here and say, that there's a concern about whether or not they're going to be doing lawfare with Donald Trump. But Donald Trump, it does not have to do lawfare. Donald Trump has, in fact, enforced the law, and that's why it's going to be very bloody out here. I don't mean bloodshed. I mean, it's going to be very bloody in terms of some people got to go to jail. And it won't be about retribution. It's about applying the law. And we got that restoration of the law. And that's what they're concerned about. And that's what you're going to see all these pardons about and so on and so forth. I'll finish this up next week. But just think about that and go and read the document here in Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2. That's where you need to read and understand that. Okay, next week, until next week, I want you to follow your dream. If you don't follow your dream, you never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.